This remarkable woman is Dorothy Kilgallen. She was an extremely well-connected media personality and nationally syndicated newspaper columnist from the 1940s through the mid-60s. While she was best known to Americans old enough to remember this period of time as a longtime panelist on the then very popular TV show, What's My Line, make no mistake about it, she was also a very serious investigative writer who maintained a very highly critical attitude of the way that the press had treated the Kennedy assassination and wrote openly and fairly accurately about the UFO cover-up in the 50s and into the 60s. Her column in the now-defunct Journal American, which was read by quite a few million people every week, called The Voice of Broadway, alternated between an old-fashioned celebrity gossip column and hardcore investigative writing. In 1952, for example, she reported on an unidentified flying object that had crashed near Spitsbergen, Norway. Rational concern that the wreck might represent advanced Russian technology was undercut by the testimony of a Norwegian Air Force colonel who claimed that the Board of Inquiry that had looked into this, quote, "Some time ago, a misunderstanding was caused by saying that the disk probably was of Soviet origin. It has, this we wish to state emphatically, not been built by any country on Earth," end quote. No, I take that back. The quote continues. "The materials used in the construction are completely unknown to experts having participated in this investigation." 8 years later, Kilgallen published an article entitled "Flying Saucer Wreckage Assures Britain of Reality." It appeared on May 23, 1955, in London's International News Service and was picked up by numerous newspapers there in the Great Britain and abroad, including the Los Angeles Examiner. To quote, "I can report today on a story which is positively spooky, and to mention chilling, and not to mention chilling. British scientists and airmen are explaining the wreckage of one of mysterious flying ship, and they're convinced that the strange aerial objects are not optical illusions, but are flying saucers that originate on another planet. The source of my information is a British official of cabinet rank who prefers to remain unidentified. We believe, on the basis of our inquiry thus far, that the saucers were staffed by small men, probably under 4 feet tall. It's frightening, but there's no denying the flying saucers come from another planet." The official quoted scientist as saying a flying saucer of this type could not possibly have been constructed on Earth. The British government, I learned, is withholding an official report on the flying saucer examination at this time, possibly because it does not want to frighten the public, end quote. We now know that there were such considerations at this point in the early 50s. When Kilgallen while she never made her source public, and she again is talking about a cabinet-level official. This is not some, goofball reporter or hack or cultist. Key investigators have speculated that the account originated with Queen Elizabeth's husband, Lord Mountbatten. Louis Mountbatten was a larger-than-life figure who was involved militarily, diplomatically, and ultimately lost his life in a terrorist bombing in London. Gordon Creighton, a former diplomat and British Army officer, military intelligence officer, went on to become editor of Britain's long-running Flying Saucer Review, which is the longest published UFO publication in certainly the English language in history. After reading her column, Creighton wrote to Dorothy Kilgallen at once seeking further information, but never got a reply from her, and she died a few years later. We can take it as certain that she had been effectively removed, was Creighton's comment, after Ms. Kilgallen's death was reported. Additional support for this account can be deduced from a statement issued at about this time by Britain's Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowling, who said in part, quote, "I am convinced that these objects do exist and that they are not manufactured by any nation on Earth." Talk about disclosure. These were public statements made in the international press more than 60 years ago, and yet, here we are still living in the funk. Air Marshal Dowling, and the shot before was Gordon Creighton. This gentleman is my friend and colleague Timothy Good, one of the most respected UFO writers in the United Kingdom, and certainly the best connected. He noted in his very important book, Above Top Secret, which should be in every UFO library, quote, "Why should Dorothy Kilgallen risk her reputation as one of the USA's star journalists by propagating an untrue story? To the best of my knowledge, she never denied the story. Furthermore, a number of similar stories from reliable sources have surfaced over the years, not all of which can be discounted, however absurd they may sound," end quote. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Following the assassination of President Kennedy, Dorothy Kilgallen was one of the very few American journalists, not just with the intellect, the curiosity, but the flat-out courage to reject the lone gunman theory that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone. She also, and I have no idea how, became the only journalist to talk her way into Jack Ruby's jail cell and interview him. The interview and other factors convinced the reporter that the president's murder was the result of a conspiracy about which she laid her thoughts out in a series of columns, even publishing the text of Ruby's classified testimony before the Warren Commission. Unfortunately, Kilgallen was very public about the fact that she was saving her best material, including the interview with Ruby and other damning material, for a book that she was writing. That may have sealed her fate, because on November 8th of 1965, she was found dead in her bed in her Manhattan apartment. However, there was a book propped up in her lap, and it was upside down. She did not have her reading glasses on and could not have read without them. She was wearing a sweater over her nightgown, which she would have never done in a room where it was warm enough. She also had her false eyelashes on, which she would have always taken off before bed. And although this may sound quirky, she had a big Manhattan apartment, had not slept in the master bedroom for years. She slept in a guest bedroom, and yet her body was found in that bed. Mark Lane, a pioneering JFK assassination researcher and author of the very important Plausible Denial, was convinced that Ms. Kilgallen had been murdered and that the CIA might have been involved. Not surprisingly, the extensive files that Kilgallen had built up on the incriminating aspects of the Kennedy assassination were missing from her apartment when her body was found. Given this, these and other significant confirmed factors that are too long to go into, I am absolutely convinced that Dorothy Kilgallen was murdered. One can speculate that it had to do with her interest in and fairly accurate reporting about the UFO phenomena, but I think for the forces that be in the mid-60s in the United States intelligence community, that would have been backburnered. I think she was killed for what she was going to reveal about the Kennedy assassination. It's fair, though, to keep open speculation that it might have been influenced by the UFO factor.